It's a good time to turn around and have the audience come in. I'm going to request Mr. Krishnamurthy's help. Sir, I can't make out who wants to ask a question. Krish, can you help, please?
Sir, this is Vikram from NISM. I am going to read the question which are asked by the attendees.
Okay.
The one Vishal Sukla name is there. He asked, Black Death in medieval Europe caused significant decrease in population and resulted in large land holding and impacted the natural level of output. The desire to work large land holding could have led to industrial revolution. What impact do the panelists see on long-term productivity? Do they think machine learning and AI would not further deepen the digital divide, mainly in developing countries like India, where our collective skill levels in the population are far behind the developed world?
I think it's a fascinating question. This conflict between people of my vintage and youngsters, fortunately, is a little less pronounced in India because fortunately there are more youngsters than people of my vintage in this country. Therefore, their ability to adapt to newer technologies, what Navneet spoke about, the crisis creates the opportunity for us to become a hub of innovation, what he calls a second Y2K moment for Indian IT industry to seize the pond. I think it's a huge one for India. United States and Europe particularly are at the other end of the spectrum, where even I will pass off for a youngster. So they have a different kind of a challenge in that a lot of people have been are still fit because the health is good, but they don't have much income. Their assets got blown up a couple of times in the last 10 years, 10, 12 years. And their ability to look ahead in the future is kind of looking dim. So I think that would still be a West America, Europe largely an America problem. India, one of our advantages is the demographics, and because we have such a large percentage of the population, 2/3 of the population is less than 35. So I think we are okay on that score on reskilling and doing. Now, while that's a macro story, the micro story will be there would be individuals who will be hurt and therefore their consumption ability. But that's a more micro story, so long as the big macro story remains good. Navneet, you want to add?
No, I think Van is best positioned to comment on it. But I think there is going to be the digital divide will lead to a lot of disruption. And the digital haves versus have-nots, I think, will lead to a lot of challenges for large part of the population. I mean, you keep hearing these stories about one of the largest bank in the world, I mean, firing 400 legal experts or whatever, the people in their legal department, because the AI is doing a better job in drafting of contracts. And I can just go on and on and on talking about it. So surely there is going to be a big divide. Now it's up to the society. How do we reskill people? How do we, I think it's a much, maybe a question for another panel, maybe over a period of time, jobs versus livelihoods versus the way we know how people earn their income and they work, I think is going to undergo a massive change. My views are a very strong view. UBI is going to be a reality. There's going to be a part of the population which will be severely impacted because of this digital divide. The only way governments can help is through some kind of an UBI, and the remaining people will have to pay for it. And also for businesses, it is not only the challenge for the government, but I think rising inequality is not good, which includes the digital divide. And I think it's the responsibility of each business leader also to ensure that they keep reskilling people and keep finding ways how do you employ people who kind of get left behind, to ensure that they have the societal license to keep making money. But would love to hear Van's view on this. It's a great question.
Yeah, no, I also thought the question was great, and I was been trying to formulate an answer as Vaidhi and you spoke. So in the Indian context, given the ubiquity of mobile phones and so far how cheap they have been in terms of the cost of data, etc., and I don't know if it is going to stay that way, but I hope it does, then to some extent the digital divide may not be as formidable as it appeared some years ago. But again, I mean, the point Navneet you made about, for example, using the example of a top bank firing 400 lawyers, etc. So I think that is where the taxation system can play a role in changing the incentive between the hiring of labor and hiring of capital. I mean, last week or rather this Tuesday, the article I wrote together with my friend and co-author Gulzar Natarajan on the deductibility of interest from taxable profits did create a predictable backlash from several people whose interests are aligned with leverage. So, so in that sense, that was only the tip of the iceberg. In terms of how do we structure the incentive system, I mean, you have to go back to history, why such a deduction was given in the first place for the banking sector and how it eventually spread, etc. So I think this issue, to some extent, fiscal and regulatory policy can firewall India from the potential impact of artificial intelligence on the demand for labor. But having said that, in a way, the second answer I would give is, in a way, the fact that we have missed the bus so far on education per se, compared to, let's say, East Asia, whether it is in primary or secondary education, we haven't done a good job as a country so far. I'm talking purely from the point of view of education outcomes, with all these tests showing how 8th standard people cannot do the 5th standard math or vice versa, etc., etc. So I think because we have not done a good job so far, and because the skills that have been acquired so far are going to become relatively less relevant, we can actually jump over the shoulders of others and get to a different level better than what we have done so far. So these are my responses. Yeah.
Chris, back to you. Next question.
Question asked by Nehal Vora. He asked, how would the Atmanirbhar policy of the Honorable PM pan out for macro and micro growth given the various geopolitical crises which the world is facing?
Oh, wonderful. It's such a beautiful topic. Almost everyone will speak. So let's start with, but my request is to keep it crisp. So if we can start with Deepak and then move to Navneet and then Anand.
For Nags, actually. He has to tell us about it.
But I just wanted to give him a little time to collate his thoughts. You know us, right? You know him, right? So give him little time so he can then come with the punch. Why don't you start on the banking and technology side?
Well, banking and technology, we are pretty much Atmanirbhar. I don't think we really rely on too much outside the system. So I think that is not too much of an issue. But Nags must mention about if US is not the destination of choice increasingly, and the 250-year cycle and the 50-year cycle comes to an end, then does Atmanirbharta actually?
Navneet, you want to go in?
To me, I think it should not be taken as like a protectionist India or an isolationist India, but actually an India which is self-confident and deeply engaged with the world. We should assume our rightful role in the world and look at the world around today. I mean, there is definitely a lack of leadership in the world, and I think we should go back to our Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is our family. We have a lot to gain by engaging with the world than being very isolationist or protectionist. I mean, the world is looking at these, whatever, 1.35 billion potential consumers. The world is looking at hundreds of millions of young, educated, skilled people who can serve the rest of the world in variety of ways. In the sphere of technology, if you go around universities, the professors, to go around the world, the Indian doctors, the role that we have to play over the next 10, 20 years is, I think the Atmanirbhar should be taken as a self-confident, self-reliant. We unleash the power of our human resources, natural resources, and kind of rule the world from a soft power perspective and not from an imperial ambition of a China or some of the Western powers.
Lord Nageshwaran.
No, I think the good point Navneet made is Atmanirbhar should not become an excuse for autarky or protectionism. East Asia did a good job. they did protect their industries, but held them to certain performance standards. And export growth is not going to happen in a organic manner, because global growth is going to be weaker. So in fact, we have to grab market share. To grab market share, you have to benchmark ourselves. So there are some areas where we have done well. One is, of course, software, and the other one is we did go from food importing country to a food self-sufficiency. And even very recently, from the making of ventilators for COVID, I think, collaboration between the private and the public sector, etc., happened. Now today we are in a position actually to export ventilators. So it's all about interpreting Atmanirbhar correctly as sort of making sure that we are not held captive by global weaknesses and global headwinds, but being prepared to handle them. At the same time, it cannot be an excuse to accept slipshod performance or mediocrity. Then in that case, this can actually be an engine for India's growth in this decade.
Great. Next question.
Sir, the next question is, almost all panel members agree policymakers need to do resetting in context of innovation. How you all can make that actually happen? Who will bail the cat? Any working model of a specific or generic approach for the same?
Okay. I'm going to ask Navneet to speak, and then I will kind of share a corporate perspective on this subject. But Navneet, why don't you give the
all our policies on the
capital?
all our policies on the agricultural front actually has they come from that mindset of shortages, right? In 40s, 50s, 60s, PL 480, wheat import, etc. And I think we haven't really changed. And in a period where we have become from a food deficit to a food surplus country, and you know it better. I mean, across, like, whether you look at cereals or dairy or pulses or horticulture, almost in like all spheres, we have gone from a food deficit to a food surplus country. There is tremendous potential for us to reduce our imports, to increase our exports substantially, to improve our productivity. Price discovery, value addition. These are like two big challenges in our agriculture. I think dismantling of APMC, dismantling of that Essential Commodities Act, and some of the other investments in warehousing, cold chain, etc., can go a long way. The another biggest issue with our agriculture is we have 250 million people dependent on agriculture, producing the same amount of food which is done by maybe not even a fraction of that in the United States. So maybe there could be just 2 or 3 or 4 million people producing the same amount of output that 250 million people are doing in India. We have to move them out of the agriculture and employ them gainfully in some of the other places by doing the right reskilling, and invest very, very deeply in agriculture and get the size of a scale. I mean, I'm sure from your vantage point, you have a far better view on agriculture.
I want to take the question not just limited to agriculture, but rural India generally. Let me tell you, if in the month of May, the challenge was, the discussions on risk management was about what Deepak was referring to. Is this agony going to be 2 months, 3 months, or is it going to be 5 to 6 months, or is it going to be longer than that? Come June, you heard the head of our farm business come on television more recently, but come June, the problem was no more on the demand side, it was on the supply side, right? That's how swiftly. So the point that Navneet made about risk managers need to be nimble, we learned it by experience through May and June. The question that came front and center to us is, the demand is out there, monsoon is looking good, the government is supporting rural India, the farmer is willing to spend. How are you going to produce the tractors? Our June numbers were far better than June 2019 numbers, and that's public data, right? So I think the first thing to learn is Indian economy is famous for sudden, sharp, surprising turnarounds that just throw all risk management models out the window. From a risk managing the downside, you end up managing the risk on the upside. The second part of it is, I think, if you combine digital with building smart cities and rural India, you actually can decentralize the economy in a very, very big way. If you go back 60, 70 years, America, till the Second World War, it was possibly an 8 or a 10 city country, much like India today. Post the Second World War, with the baby boomers, they built one city and then photocopied it 500 times and created 500 new cities with population ranging from 40, 50,000 to a maximum of 500,000. And they have so many such cities all over the country, which have all become different economic zones by itself. When I say they are self-contained, doesn't mean that they don't do business with others, but they are prosperous cities. But they are not in the top 10 cities of America. So India has to use this with digital, with smart cities, with all the innovation that we can do, start creating this third and fourth tier cities, which will help the economy delegate and decentralize away from these 7, 8 cities that we are too stuck in. So the social distancing, less crowding should therefore help create new cities and new opportunities. The third, our problem in agriculture, the least of our problem is the production. It's the pre and the post that really leaves us a lot of ground to cover. And I see that as a huge opportunity. So if we can kind of fast forward our innovation spend on those areas, both upstream and downstream, right? I mean, I don't want to bore you with data, but if you look at the R&D spend in seeds, for example, between India and say United States, we look like a pygmy next to it. But that's where you need to get the R&D monies going. So that's what I think is really the way to look at risk management in the context of opportunity. The last point I would make is, from a corporate standpoint, we need to kind of start looking at businesses, right? Which are the cash generators? Those cash generators are the ones that we need to fortify and protect. Go out of your way to make sure that the cash generators are strong and whatever liquidity they need is available. The second are growth generators. As Navneet said, world is not going to come to an end. We've gone through this. Darwin's theory has taught us maybe a dinosaur will go extinct, but some other species will come. So there is going to be life after COVID. There is going to be business after COVID. So you need growth generator, which is where the innovation comes in. So the capital required for innovation. So your business should either be a cash generator, which makes it defensive and protects you, or a growth generator, provided you have enough stamina to survive. The others are guzzlers. The others are guzzlers. You need to find a way to plug the leak. You cannot have buckets which are leaking. So you need to use this never waste a good crisis, all the tough measures that you've been wanting to take with businesses, reduce capital allocation, reallocate resources, whatever you wanted to do, use this crisis as an excuse, God sent, and do that. I would say that those would be some of the key measures I want to conclude, because we are out of time. I want to conclude with something that Navneet referred to in his 5R theory. So I'm going to say that really what the markets are looking at, what stakeholders are looking at, is survival. Survival requires stamina. Survival requires vitamin A. The markets are willing to allow some slack in liquidity. The markets are willing to allow some slack in terms of having excess capital. It is about what you're doing to protect yourself. So in a sense, I would summarize that between resilience and ratios, pick resilience. It is what will make you survive for the next 12 months, 24 months. If you get too lost on ratios right now, you may not be there around for the next quarter or the quarter after that. So I think the big message I want to leave everybody with is is in that R principle of his, the choice is between resilience and ratios. There is time for ratios. The markets have been kind to give you another year for it, but right now the time is for resilience. Use that effectively and move on. I want to thank your panelists for participating and providing their inputs and fascinating comments, observations, and points that they made. I want to thank Mr. Mohanty for staying through and creating this platform through NISM for us to do this event. I want to thank all the organizers behind the scenes, but most importantly to the audience who sat through, in a sense, invisible to us, but your presence was felt by some of the questions that came through. If there are other questions that we couldn't take, Krish will send it to me, and I will try and get the responses from these great panelists and send it back to you. On behalf of the panel, on behalf of the organizing committee, thank you all so much and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for wonderfully summing up the entire message. Thank you, sir, Vaidhi, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thanks
you.
all the panelists. Thanks, directors, sir.
Thank you.